How would I describe Lanshan? It's one of the forest stations in the Forestry Bureau's Mugwa Forest District. It's a timber production area. Back in the day, the district was extracting 35,000 cubic meters of logs annually. National finances were in bad shape back then. We had to export wood to earn foreign exchange.
While there were dormitories and sheds up there, working in the mountains wasn't easy. Where was work to be done now? Where was work to be done? We lived close to our work, so didn't stay long in one spot. We'd move anywhere necessary. We'd move from one valley to the next, carrying just what was in our backpacks.
Indigenous, Hokkien, mainlanders, lots of different people were involved. There were Magay, skidders, lumberjacks, truck drivers, and of course cableway operators. We all got along great.
I prefer it up there in the mountains. More fun. I lived together with my parents, and we had snow and saw sunsets. I used to put my younger brother and sister onto the rail cars and push them along the tracks. I miss all that so much. It's impossible now. The station's been abandoned. No way to get up now.
Lanshan Station is set in the mountains, near the source of Hualien City's main rivers. It was originally just one section of the Taroko Forestry District. Its primary products were cedar and cypress. Also, the station was a relative latecomer to commercial forestry in Taiwan. We have 3 teams this time, one from the Hualien Forest District Office, one from Donghua University, and one from Visionway Productions, which is here to film the survey and its findings. Altogether, over 20 people will help create a complete record of the Lanshan site. Another team had explored these mountains nearly a century earlier. However, rather than seeking history, they wanted to survey and map eastern Taiwan's forests. Kurosawa Shinsuke, an engineer in Taiwan's Colonial Forestry Bureau, led this mission in 1921 as part of the colonial government's effort to complete an inventory of timber resources on the island. Kurosawa's survey was made soon after Japanese colonial authorities had completed the forceful removal of native Truku from these mountains, giving the team unprecedented access to the deep forests and the opportunity to compile a thorough and detailed report. His report 2 years later confirmed that the area contained vast, easily reached coniferous forests rich in valuable hinoki and meniki cypress. Noting such exceptional conditions, Kurosawa recommended that the government manage the logging operations. Financial problems led Japan to decide against government-run logging. Instead, using survey results and Mugwa River as the dividing line, authorities divided the area into the southern Qingshui Stream District and the northern Taroko Logging District. These are where Hualien Station, Mugwa Logging District, and Lanshan Station, Taroko Logging District, would later be sited. We're now on Baya Mountain heading south along the ridgeline. We're staying mainly on the ridge and making our way steadily upward toward Baya Peak. The slope here is relatively mild, so we're slowly heading... We're at around 1,380 meters now, slowly working our way to 1,560 meters. After that, it gets significantly steeper.
After we reach 1,800 meters, we'll zigzag a bit before we finally make tonight's campsite.
"20 years after Kurosawa's survey, the Nanbang Forestry Company, a lumber supplier to the Japanese military, applied to the colonial government in 1941 for permission to log in the Taroko logging district. By this time, timber was already big business in Taiwan, with government-run logging at Alishan, Baxianshan, and Taipingshan, and privately run logging at Lintianshan and elsewhere. Moreover, Hualien and Muguashan, south of the Mugua River, were also being logged by the Karenko Lumber Company. Harvesting high-value virgin hinoki and meiniki cypress for milling and sale was highly lucrative for the Japanese government and private businesses alike. In the early 1940s, Hualien's Taroko logging district, north of the Mugua River, remained a rich and untapped timber resource. However, colonial authorities still initially rejected Nanbang's permit application, citing among their reasons a recent decision to incorporate the area into Tsukitaka Taroko National Park. While its prior designation as a timber resources district was ultimately used to justify permit approval, it was the sharp need for supplies to wage an increasingly costly Pacific War that likely tipped the scales.
After America joined the Pacific War in 1941, Japan really needed military supplies. That's when approval was given to Nanbang Forestry. The company was already a military contractor, so the authorities gave it permission to start logging the Taroko district.
In 1944, Nanbang Forestry, using Sagura Village as its staging grounds, began building the infrastructure necessary to start logging. This included the Sagura Timber Yard and a 4-section and 2-section log transport cableway. However, the war effort drained the project of supplies and labor, and further work was suspended. The first logs from the Taroko logging district began coming down and being milled in late July 1945. In terms of timing, this was a mere 1 month before Japan's surrender and the end of the Pacific War.
Hualien 1号， Hualien 1号，目前我们的标高1778，人员平安，目标往七角川山的方向行走。
我收到。
好，感谢。
Our main objective is to investigate several sites of historical interest. The members of this team have all done the textual and documentary research, but it's been just ink and paper. We wanted to actually see the situation of these places, so we've all been quite excited.
After the end of the Pacific War in September 1945 and Taiwan's handover to the Republic of China, the new government changed the district's name first to Hualien Harbor Mountain District, and then to the Taroko zone of Taipingshan Logging District. Inadequate cableways and tracks, and the less-than-ideal routing of logs down the mountain led to a near-complete shutdown of logging activities. To increase productivity, the district was again reorganized as the Taroko Logging District under the Forestry Bureau. Provincial government support and USAID funding then set forestry in Taroko onto a new track. Infrastructure and equipment were significantly upgraded during this period. The original single-line cableway was replaced by a 3-section dual-line cableway. The number 3 cableway dispatch point was installed next to the administrative office in Lanshan subdistrict. From this point, rail lines branched out into the Taroko Main Line, Mount Fufu Branch Line, and lines to other work sections. The rail line running out from the base station was also rerouted along the riverbank and into Tianpu Station, where logs could be transferred to the East Coast trunk line. Tianpu Holding Pond and Taichung Timber Yard were built to accommodate the anticipated new volumes. Each project reinforced the Taroko logging district's solid new foundation, while rapidly increasing production fully met government expectations for this exclusively run venture. Fell timber, plant trees, feed the national treasury was the mission shouldered by Taiwan's forestry sector in support of national recovery and development.
I took this one. The trees we cut down back then were fantastic. Huge. These are the prettiest in the world. In 1950, the Forestry Bureau made me Chief of Operations, in charge of production, which meant cutting down trees. Skidding belonged to a separate section. We hadn't dug the tunnel yet, so we're working mainly in Section 16. It was a one-line cableway, so just one way, with limited carrying capacity. For bigger extra-long logs, we used a special saw to cut these in half. The dissector was what we called the guy who handled this saw. We then used a winch to load logs and dressed wood onto the cars. When I first started, there were no engines, just manual push carts. Back then, everything we used and ate was third-rate. But no one complained. We thought what we were doing was really important. I knew I was contributing to national development. Having lived through it, it's still very real to me.
We crossed a rubble-covered incline before reaching about 1,980 meters in elevation. By then we'd entered the old logging district. So, on the ground here, what we're seeing here are vestiges of the earliest section of the timber rail line. Documents from that time tell us that the budget they had to work with wasn't enough to extend the railway toward Mount Patualu. So they decided to build this rail line first in order to extract the good timber that still remained on the western face of Mount Qijiaochuan.
This is Section 16. Its location relatively close to Lanshan Subdistrict headquarters meant that logs could be felled and transported quickly down the mountain. But one section couldn't sustain operations for long. Loggers pushed further into the mountains. Annual government targets demanded increased production. Thus, various infrastructure expansion projects were concurrently undertaken. The mountains attracted a myriad of professionals. These included highly trained management, logging and reforestation experts, experienced lumberjacks, skidders, and transport workers, and forestry policemen. While some brought their families with them to Lanshan, a larger number came to work on the mountain alone. Working around the year with little time off, many took leave from the mountain about once a month. Some, however, went for 6 months or more without seeing civilization.
It used to be difficult to get to the district. I started working when I was 17, and the foreman had a lot of faith in me. Little Monkey. They called me Little Monkey. He can do it. He can really ride the cables. I could climb up to get stuff or install stuff, just like a monkey. That's why I had a job. We installed the number 3 cableway. But of all the guys there, I probably had it the toughest. Dinner time,
my coworkers went home and just picked up the chopsticks. Dinner was waiting. Their wives had everything ready. I wasn't so lucky. I had to make my own buns, my own noodles, had to cook myself. I have kids. My wife was looking after them in town. Family is everything to her. What we have is because of her.
When the Taiwan Forest Administration reorganized as the Provincial Forestry Bureau in February 1960, the Lanshan subdistrict of the Taroko Logging District was renamed Lanshan Station under the Mugwa Forest District. By this time, logging had expanded outward along both sides of the Taroko main rail line and deeper into the mountains. This was also when administrative offices and dormitories relocated from the No. 3 cableway dispatch point to Lanshan Station in Section 18. The buildings left behind, with the exception of the school, were repurposed and used by cableway workers. The two wooden structures here were once the highest altitude school buildings in Hualien County.
The Lanshan sub-district area came first, so the school for workers' children here opened in 1955 and typically taught about 20 students. It was first designated an affiliated class and was later upgraded to an affiliate of Shuiyuan Elementary School. However, after the forestry community had largely relocated to Section 18, Lanshan Station, enrollment dropped and the school was finally shuttered in 1967.
Back then in elementary school, I lived in Section 18. We'd ride the log train to school every day. Lessons weren't particularly punctual because our car hooked onto the back of a loaded log train. It wasn't a special train just for us. In school, this session was for first graders, the next session was for second graders, the rest of the time we could just play. School was sometimes canceled by snow because we couldn't get to school when the train stopped running. When it snowed, we kids were so happy. We'd take out our wash basins and spin around to give the surface a frosty coating of white. We all thought it was great. But Mom and the others had so much extra work to do. They were really busy.
看起来应该有数十年的时间了。这个区块应该是在背风处，所以说它整个树高都达到20-30米，哇，非常通直，很漂亮，跟电线杆一样，好美。这是柳杉吗？柳杉。 安全啊！安全第一。可以啊，没问题。
The Long Cui Tunnel here on the map was a critical engineering project on the Taroko Main Line. When laying the line to Lanshan Station from the No. 3 cableway dispatch point, Chijiaochuan Ridge effectively blocked the way. So they opened a tunnel below the ridge, which resolved the problem. Now that they had a tunnel, the rail line could follow the ridge line south of Mount Patualu, penetrate deep into the Mount Patualu region, and then, after that, they could tap sufficient forest resources to meet their timber production targets. However, as you can all see, lack of maintenance has led to extensive tunnel collapse. Looking here, you can see that in constructing this tunnel, they used heavy hinoki cypress beams for support. So now it's really a shame. This means that this tunnel isn't an option for us to reach Lanshan Station. We now need to climb up and over the ridge to get to the other side of the tunnel.
The Lanshan community relocated from the number 3 cableway dispatch point to Lanshan Station, along the southern ridge of Mount Patualu at 1,970 meters above sea level. Lanshan Station was charged with the management of 25 sections in the Mugua and Liwuxi logging districts, an area totaling more than 13,600 hectares. The Taroko main rail line centered on Lanshan Station, where it branched out in all directions. Timber production, the movement of people and materials, all were connected via the railway and Lanshan Station.
在围观什么？
对啊，然后突然就断了。
让一下，让一下。
哦，谢谢。
哇！
包包可以过就好了。
Left abandoned and unmaintained, most of the 23.65-kilometer Taroko main line is now damaged beyond repair. Some of the elevated bridges are in danger of collapse. After experienced guides fix ropes in place to ensure the safety of the teams, the derelict Taroko main line remains the clearest, most straightforward route to Lanshan Station. From here, Lanshan Station lies a tantalizing 2 kilometers away. We're at Lanshan Station's center of religious worship, Rongshan Temple. Everyone's begun taking care of their individual tasks and responsibilities. My main responsibility here is to create an image database of all the buildings here at Lanshan Station, including front, back, and side perspectives and interior spaces. Shengwan and Youju are taking survey measurements of the entire station. Yaohe and Ye are inventorying all of the historical materials and documents found.
我们先去把这间找到，然后再往这边看有没有找到那个苗圃。
The scale of the station is actually quite extensive. Records say it was built for a population of over 200. There was a company store, bathhouse, the housing for managers, entertainment facilities, a communication center, even a house for VIP guests. It was a complete community.
Year 所以是温度计吗？这基本要带下去的，我已经把它整理出来。
那就小叶他们标出来之后，再给科长样一下，这样子好不好？好，OK。
啊，对，塑胶袋育苗，这头刚刚有看到。
This morning we surveyed the structures above the rail tracks. To the east here is where the engine repair shop and general workshop were, as well as offices, some storage buildings, and fuel depot. We'll get to the dormitories this afternoon, I hope.
Lanshan Station in Mugwa Forest District Section 18 occupied a level, broad plot of land, making it better arranged and better equipped than its predecessor astride the number 3 cableway dispatch point. Lanshan Station grew as both timber shipments and employee numbers grew. At its peak, Lanshan was a community of over 40 buildings. Most were constructed of locally sourced hinoki cypress, with only a few made of cement. This tight-knit community, under the station director, controlled production in all forests under station jurisdiction. All production units sent regular and detailed reports to Lanshan Station, and the station was inextricably entangled in the lives of all on the mountain.
I was station director for 2 years. Of course, this person is responsible for everything. My employees and I were always connected, day in, day out. Whatever it was, you went to the station director. It's how it was up there. Logging done was further up in the mountains. So were skidding operations. So we relied on them to tell us their needs. Was there a problem scheduling trains? Were there other problems? Back then, we had 4 engines pulling 10 cars each. Each car could carry about 2 cubic meters, so daily capacity was about 100 cubic meters. Our annual production target was fixed at around 35,000 cubic meters. Yes, sir. If you were producing a lot, if you were above quota, you could speak a bit louder at meetings. If you were falling short, you'd do better to keep quiet.
An integrated railway and suspension cable network moved the timber harvested from the mountainous landscape around Lanshan Station. Engines pulled log-laden cars past Lanshan Station and Longcui Tunnel to the number 3 cableway dispatch point, where logs were sent downward one by one, first to the second and then to the first dispatch points, ultimately making their way to either Taichung Timber Yard for sale or to Tianpu Holding Pond for export. Because of its comparatively late development and its use of the latest forestry equipment from the United States and Japan, Lanshan Station quickly became one of Taiwan's most productive logging areas. Lanshan Station regularly supplied much of the Forestry Bureau's hinoki cypress exports to Japan.
Lanshan Station drove economic activity in Mugwa Forest District, especially around 1966, when exports to Japan peaked. The government earned a lot in foreign exchange. Take Japan's Shinkansen, for example. When I was district manager, our mill's biggest team was sleepers for the Shinkansen, the ones they laid across bridges. They had to be hinoki cypress. Lanshan was a uniquely ideal combination of quality and productivity. It was why we were so important to the Forestry Bureau. They'd always send us the latest. New chainsaws, new skidding equipment, they'd send it to us. So I can say that in terms of mechanization, we were the most advanced. At the time, most other timber fields in Taiwan had been exhausted and were gradually shutting down.
As a key funding source for national economic and infrastructure work, it was critical that Lanshan Station operated smoothly. Thus, a concerted effort was made to ensure that workers and their families lived in relative comfort in order to keep everyone working together to to achieve station objectives.
We built dormitories and the workers had their quarters. Everyone had a place to live. For meals, married families took care of themselves. We single employees had a cooking collective, and we'd figure out what everyone owed at the end of each month. There was no real entertainment. I had the Welfare Association pitch in and buy us a billiards table. Apart from that, we just drank and played cards. Back then, the hero of Yuan-yu was crazy popular on television. I had the substation turn on the power at noon, and we'd all watch it on the TV in the VIP bungalow. Reception was never particularly good, but we could hear what was going on. We didn't really mind the blurry picture. In the morning, we found something pretty neat during our survey of the dormitories. I think it was Hwa-ching Lin. We think it was his room. His name was written down there, and we found the phrase, "Reforestation is a sacred duty," written onto a pane of glass. What was unusual here was that the room was very clean and proper. Even the pillows were neatly stacked. There was also a trunk marked with his name. It was just that you could really feel his presence in that room, even though he had long since left.
Our dormitories and offices were in Section 18, where Lanshan Station was. But we worked all over the forest sections in the area. We changed work sites frequently. We'd be on one side of a mountain for a while, and then move to the other side. We drifted a lot. One strong memory from back then was from just after my wife had given birth. I'd been on the mountain for over a month. As soon as I came down, I didn't even unhitch my gear. I was really anxious to hold my child. When my kid saw me all shaggy and with my beard grown out, he got scared. He cried. Wow, think about that. That was a hard thing to take. It really was.
From 1945 until 1989, Lanshan Station consistently had over 100 employees working over a topography that ranged from 120 to 3,000 meters above sea level. They were there for their country, their families, and themselves. They were doing highly specialized and dangerous work. News spread fast about accidents from falling trees, train derailments, and snapped cableways. Apart from improving safety measures, prayers were given at Rongshan Temple, asking Bodhisattva and the mountain and earth gods to watch over the safety and welfare of all at Lanshan Station.
Today we're packing light for the hike up to Rongshan Lookout. Records show that it's to the north of Lanshan Station, north and a bit to the east. From our maps, we think that it's about 1.5 to 2 kilometers away in terms of straight line distance. In the records and literature we have from the Forest District, overlooks in the area were all labeled as fire observation stations. Most were located on the highest points along ridges, which were also used for triangulation. Lookouts had good views of the surrounding area, perfect for keeping a lookout for fires. Those who staffed these stations, apart from watching for fires, also kept a regular log of weather conditions, including temperature, wind direction, humidity. The data were all reported back to Lanshan Station.
到了到了，哎呦，真的很好呢，哇！可以到楼上去吧？哇，ヒノキ！哇！ 玻璃也没破，木头也都没有烂，这间足赞的呢。
Rongshan Lookout was one of just a few two-story buildings at Lanshan Station. Built 2,373 meters above sea level, it was regularly manned by just 1 or 2 employees. Because work here didn't relate directly to timber production, the station received few visitors. Thus, lookouts like this were the loneliest corners of Lanshan Station. Lookout staff once had unhindered views of the surrounding forests through second-floor windows, where they watched for the telltale smoke of wildfires. Today, successful reforestation has blocked these views completely. Saplings planted after the timber harvest have taken hold and matured.
The policy back then was, once an area had been logged out, it had to be replanted immediately. So 3 to 4 years before we would log somewhere, we were already organizing and starting the reforestation effort. The first step was to find a patch of level ground to build a temporary nursery. We'd completely deferred to what had been growing there already when deciding which species to select, cultivate, and then plant. We made sure that the saplings were acclimated to the environment, climate, and soil in order to maximize the yield of reforestation efforts. We were working to sustain forest functions, to sustain their importance.
After the tunnel, in about 50 meters, you can still see the outlines of rectangular plots. This was where the early nurseries were located. They're each about 100 to 200 meters in length. Look at that nursery! Both the sections that have grown back on their own and those with leftover saplings have really done well. It's grown back already into strong second-growth forest. Nice!
Forests can self-regenerate, and proper management can extend their economic value. Reforestation is a key link in the forest value chain. The fruits of reforestation are readily apparent across Lanshan Station's former jurisdiction. Taiwan's second-growth forests won't be harvested, but will take their place in critical soil, watershed, and biodiversity conservation and carbon sequestration efforts. In 1975, the executive Yuan issued the 3 principles of forest management. It said that forests must be managed in line with long-term land security interests and exhorted against developing forests for economic gain. It set the stage for the contraction and ultimate end of logging at Lanshan Station.
Coming to Lanshan, I better understand the difficulties of working up here. Yep, you're up here working and getting ready to leave. I hope for good weather.
We're here mainly this time for work, to survey. When I come back again, I'd like to see what sorts of wildlife visit the station grounds and compare how things are now to how things were decades ago. I think that there will be many more people coming here in the future. When they do, I hope, when they've taken a look, I hope they leave things like they are, like you would a fossil.
When I first started mountain trekking, I heard that people used to hike from the east ridge of Chilai across to Mount Patualu to Lanshan Station, and then out along the east coast. In the 70s and 80s, lots of hikers stopped here as part of climbing Taiwan's 100 highest peaks. Today, you can find some of those hikers' pictures on the internet. Although some of the buildings may have since collapsed, there are often still telltale landmarks you can use to identify and compare. I see it as all part of the chase, all part of the story of this land.
Lanshan Station's expansive hinterland put it near the fabled hiker destination of Mount Chilai's East Ridge and 4 of Taiwan's top 100 peaks, including Mount Taroko, Mount Patualu, Mount Liwu, and Mount Panshi. During the height of hiking's popularity in the 1980s, hikers often used Lanshan's rail and cable network to guide their way safely off the central mountains. The station helped hikers as long as work wasn't affected. A serendipitous consequence of this was pictures. which added a new and engaging dimension to the Lanshan experience.
See the stuff hanging from the sides there? That's cargo, pork meat, vegetables. The car was packed with people. As long as the door would close, they were good to go. The hazy ridgeline in the distance, see that? Hualien Station. The Mugua River is below. So this is looking from Lanshan Station out toward Hualien Station. On an expedition with NCHU, we were there to sample insects in the field, but I naturally couldn't resist hiking to the top of Mount Liwu. As a scientist, I appreciate the importance of film documentation. These are extremely valuable. 1985 was when Taiwan began the switch from natural resources development to natural resources management, with increasing focuses on sustainability and conservation. This was pretty much the end of commercial forestry and logging in Taiwan.
南山再见，
拜拜，再见南山。
The forestry sector in its heyday regularly overfulfilled production targets, adding fuel to public concerns about overlogging and soil and watershed devastation. A consensus slowly crystallized around the need to reduce logging and increase tree cover in forest areas. This, coupled with rising costs, led the executive yuan to announce a phase-out of commercial logging nationwide. In June 1989, Lanshan Station was permanently shuttered, and its former responsibilities were assumed by Chang Station down below. Once trains and cableways had stopped running, man-made structures began to decay and collapse. Nature was reclaiming its hold over Lanshan. While the popularity of the Mount Chilai Lanshan hiking route had faded, hikers still made their way to the station. Lanshan had become a legitimate destination of its own, a stop on the Forestry Heritage hiking circuit.
This spot here was the dispatch point for the number 3 cableway. From here you can look directly down into Hualien City. The high perch here was the point where logs were sent down the 3rd cableway to the 2nd cableway, and then after a short rail ride to the 1st cableway.
A visit to the Lanshan forestry site today requires adequate preparation and safety considerations, as well as an approved mountain access permit. The difficulties now involved in getting here make it all the more special. Minimal outside interference has helped protect Lanshan's human and natural heritage. Lanshan Station, returned to nature's embrace, is now a place to reflect on nature's power and on our historical legacy in these mountains.
一次洗的拢最新的索道，旧的索道我们以前就是不是从这边上去的，是从那边那边上去。那新的索道就从这边这个溪左边。
I first moved to Lanshan when I was 8. My mom had a lot on her hands back then. I was the oldest, so I always took care of the other kids. We went to pick bamboo shoots and ferns, and riding the cableway, we'd always see the waterfall. We'd see 1, 2, 3 streams, and we'd know how many waterfalls were there. Each carried a lot of water. Oh, it's covered in clouds now. In the mountains, when the clouds rolled in, we knew we'd get a misty rain and no sun. Clouds are full of moisture. I feel a rush of nostalgia every time I see the mountains from Hualien City. I look up at Lanshan every single day.
Today's Water Source Inspection Station building against the mountains in Hualien City sits on the former site of the number 1 cableway arch. Every log sent down from the mountain past this spot for transport onto Hualien City, to be stored and sold in accordance with Mugua Forest District instructions. With logs no longer arriving from the mountains, the heretofore regular scene of mammoth logs in transit across Hualien City streets vanished as well.
This is where we used to come and go, the gate for Chang Timber Yard's main office. There was a fence here before, but it was different than this. Also, the ground has been built up higher. It wasn't this high before. Most of Lanshan's production used to come here to Taichung. The logs would be stacked according to species and grade. Back then, the wood industry had huge sway over the Hualien city economy. There was a constant stream of wood buyers coming and going. You might say that wood was the lifeblood of the local economy. This is the original fence. Yep, it's original, definitely.
The age of commercial forestry in Taiwan has slipped into history, and those who once felled high mountain timbers have grown old. Taiwan's forestry policies in the 21st century, prioritizing sustainable use and harmonious coexistence, are working to achieve very different new milestones. What does the future now hold for Lanshan Station and its forests? This is a story for another generation to write.
This is hiking. Prepare well and just do it. I mean, I didn't have any special expectations, just a longing. When I was up there, I saw my uncle's nameplate. He was one of the last technicians to leave. His nameplate is still up there. The iris field we saw up there, I'm not certain if that was where I was born. Everything's been pretty much lost. Logging, like everything, is a product of its time. We shouldn't judge it by today's standards. Awareness of environmental issues is much higher now. What belongs to nature, we should leave to nature.